Hello, welcome to Headhunter podcast. Today's guest is someone I have been trying to get on this podcast for months. He finally said yes, joining us all the way from the Middle East. He's a global financial services indirect tax leader, a partner, a principal, former head of indirect tax at the world's largest custody bank, a chartered tax advisor, a policymaker, a committee chair, a conference speaker, an Oxford graduate, and, spoiler, a man who speaks 6 languages and is currently working on the 7th. Have I missed anything? Oh yes, the Queen and singing. Let's get into this. Welcome, Peter Dylewski.
Thank you very much, Isabella.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Having negotiated Brighton's one-way system successfully, I think that could be added to my list of achievements.
Absolutely, yes. I am privileged to have you here on my podcast. Thank you so much for making time. And we are exceptionally busy, so I very much appreciate your presence.
That's all right. As soon as the check clears, we can begin.
There we go. Shall we start from your full name? Do you get a lot of questions about this? So, because it indicates 2 different languages and cultures.
I would say people have, well, in terms of the pronunciation, one of the classic mispronunciations would be something along the lines of people associating it with dyslexia. So Dylewski, dyslexia.
Right.
I typically have, and I think you may remember this, I tell people, if they're from Britain, if you think about skiing, the left ski and the right ski, in a sort of Jamaican accent, Dylewski, would get you how you pronounce it. So typically, I think people are very quick to judge based on whatever their first perception is. And because of my accent, they may not necessarily twig that I have a Polish heritage.
That's right. I think this is when we started to speak first. I was very intrigued by your surname, but then your first name indicated you are British. Do you remember our first conversations?
I'm afraid that dementia has set in, and I only vaguely recall where I meant to be each day anyway.
All right.
So, but yes, I can certainly appreciate that sometimes people like to put things and other people into certain compartments, and my first name would indicate a particular compartment for some people.
Would you like to tell us more about your background?
I suppose the point here might be, what would it be useful for people to know? So I grew up in a single parent family. My grandmother raised me for most of my early years. The deep and dark, shameful secret that I can now come out with head up high is that I'm a Coventry City football fan. Those words all together, Coventry City and football and fan, are rarely spoken in public, and I think that has to change. Thanks to Frank Lampard and a dose of money from Mr. King, we now have the opportunity to fail spectacularly, but in the open of the Premiership. So I grew up in Coventry. And, I think growing up with my grandmother, with my mother visiting at weekends, and, sort of basically leading a quite isolated lifestyle, it was interesting because my grandmother was from the what's now Ukraine, was from sort of distant part of what was then Poland. She was shipped out during the war to Kazakhstan. She came out with the General Anders army when the Nazis attacked Soviet Russia, and Soviet Russia allowed a lot of the people that they had shipped out, Poles, to come out through the Middle East. So she came out through the Middle East, through Lebanon and through Iraq. And then she ended up in the UK, where she met my grandfather, who was also from Poland. And neither of them could go back for different reasons after the war, as much as they wanted to.
That's right.
In her case, because there was no country for her to go back to. And in his case, because he had been a policeman before the war. And they were, the communist authorities were rounding them up and shooting them after the war. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but in terms of my background, I'm going back as far as I can.
That's all right.
And tracing the Middle East connection.
Yes, of course, of course. Thank you very much for sharing this, Peter. So you studied modern languages at Oxford University. Tell us about this experience and choice of subjects. Why those two particular languages?
I think if you go back in time, when it's a bit like the Coventry City piece. Maybe I've always been somebody who's associated myself with the underdog, in the sense that when I was growing up in the early 80s, Poland was under behind the Iron Curtain, and we were always seemingly in. Sorry, this is another football analogy, Isabella, but we were always seemingly in the same group as England, and always being rather rubbish in the 80s. We'd been very good in the 70s, but I wasn't around to see that. And there was this sort of sense of Poland not being at the same level as other countries, and obviously suffering under the yoke of communism. And some of the bright points were we had a very high profile in John Paul II, the Pope,
yes,
who came to visit Coventry and the UK in 1982, and I suppose that pride in a piece of my heritage was something I wanted to continue to explore. I grew up bilingual, but my Polish was more of a, yes, I'll have another slice of cheesecake, grandma, variety, rather than being able to do anything more with the language. And so I always felt that there was something missing, something that I needed to work on. And so, at school, studying languages was a way of doing that. Studying Russian was a way of doing that in sort of parallel. And that's why I wanted to do languages at university. I've always been fascinated by other cultures and the power of language.
Yeah. So you've spent over 20 years at the intersection of financial services and indirect tax across in-house roles, Big Four leadership, and now being based in Middle East. If you had to describe that journey in one sentence, what would it be?
Enlightening.
I've got a lot of questions about this because you've done so amazingly well. You actually made a very bold move, a huge relocation from the UK to Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, to lead another practice. What was your first impression when you actually arrived there?
Maybe some context, first of all. So, I have a varied career path. I started off in the Big Four, as you mentioned. I didn't like the Big Four pyramid, at least not being at the bottom of the Big Four pyramid. I think we were called assistant consultant, which I abbreviated to assultant. And the leadership at the time in the organization I was in, we were coming down. Sorry, this is going to be a long answer, but
Not one sentence.
Hopefully a useful one.
Okay.
The leadership at the time, I think, was talking about the need to have cuts, for example. And at the same time, I could see, and this is my first job, I could see that we were coming down to the business school where we were learning our tax accounting exams. And so we had a sort of cross-section of the firm in one place. And when we came down the second time, so the first time we did our ATT exams and the first part of our ICAS diploma, second time we did our CTA, Chartered Tax Advisor exams. And we'd had 6 months in the office by that stage, each in a different part of the business, different tax service line. And came back to the business school for the second stint. And we had some people who were saying, oh, we're so busy, we're doing timesheets at the beginning of the week and the end of the week. And we had other people who were saying, we got nothing to do, we're reading Dickens novels. And sort of the reason that resource wasn't shifting was not, I say it's not specific to the Big Four, but as in all organisations, some teams were saying, well, if we give this resource away, then we're going to lose that resource and we won't have it. Soon this work will come, and we need to keep these people ready whilst learning their Dickens. And other people were just snowed, and that it just felt a little bit like there wasn't, at least in terms of my way of learning things, it wasn't the right environment to do that learning. Whereas when I got the opportunity to move in-house, which I sort of call my financial services university years, spent 7 years between Commerce Bank and Investec, and I could learn merchant banking, investment banking, structured finance, leasing, asset finance, asset management, all sort of in detail from the business, whilst growing my sort of tax knowledge and understanding where the numbers come from, how people misunderstand things, the communication and the language and the nuance, Isabella, was what I took with me from my linguistic studies, and found that it did come in useful. It wasn't completely useless. So for all you modern languages graduates out there is hope at some level. So doing that, and then flitting between, because I had stints back in the Big Four over 20 years, I suppose it was an itch I'd never scratched. So I'm coming back to your original question about the move to the Middle East. I think COVID for a lot of us gave us time for reflection, gave us time for a lot of eating of cookies in my case. But coming out of COVID, I realized it was either now or never. I'd either make a move or I would stay in the same market forever. One of the key, at least obligations, if not achievements, that you missed at the start, maybe the bigger part of my life, is the fact that I'm a father of 4. And the kids were, I call it the triumph of hope over experience, because I've got the 2 older boys who are now 25 and 23, and the younger 2, my third son and my daughter, who are 15 and 13. And my younger 2 were at an age where it was possible, schooling-wise, to think, we could actually move them without too much disruption, depending on what happens with schooling. So that was in the right place. And an opportunity came up to move, which involved working under somebody that I knew, that I knew was a decent person.
That's important.
And I will say that, yes, the quality of decency is difficult to capture on scorecards and is underrated often in terms of who actually gets into positions of power and leadership in any organisation. So that was a really big plus point for me. Was yes, there's a risk that I'm taking, of course, going to a different environment, different country, don't have the network, don't even know specifically the tax regime. But balanced against that was that it was with somebody who I knew was a good person, and they had been there a couple of years, so it can't be all bad. The tax regime was comparable because the European VAT system had been served as a model.
Yeah.
And it was a sector specialism point where the years I'd spent in the city with the mixture of in-house and professional services background were a positive, something where I could teach and give something of value, and in return, obviously, learn a lot as well. And that opportunity to be in Saudi Arabia in particular, which is on the cusp of massive societal change, massive economic change, the challenge of another language to speak badly, or to try and speak better, that all added to the mix of, yes, if I don't make it, at least I'll have tried. And I would say that to me is what I tend to say to people in my team or people who ask me about decisions they're making. I said, I can't tell you you're going to make the right decision. No one can do that. But if you make an informed decision and you execute on it strongly with passion and determination, it's probably going to come out quite well.
Thank you for that, Peter. So, how actually is your family coping, having you so far away? Obviously, you've been always for your family, very present father. You've mentioned 4 children and your lovely wife. So, how are they coping without you being with them every day? It must be a huge difference for them.
Well, I think you need to get the podcast with my wife. I don't mansplain for my wife. That never ends well. I have a number of thoughts on that. One is, of course, that every relationship needs to be looked after. And you see examples, sadly, of people who grow apart even if they live under the same roof. Physically in the same place, but not mentally, spiritually, emotionally in the same place. The old saw is men marry women because they think they won't change. Women marry men because they think they will change.
Exactly.
Both end up disappointed. There's some truth in that. I'm not going to say how much. The challenge, therefore, is more around making sure that we are connected and in some way or shape or form growing together. Sometimes that might be needing a bit of innovation in terms of, I have to travel somewhere, but it's somewhere that Alexandra and the kids can reach from the UK, and we meet halfway during a school holiday or something, or it might be that there's opportunities because of conferences or client visits or whatever. And of course, they can come out to see me. I think it's easier with the kids being the age they are.
Yes.
If they were that much younger, then it wouldn't be as simple. Simple. It's not simple. Having kids is never simple. But what I mean by that is with the older children, certainly my eldest, it may be that he doesn't need to have time with me for a couple of weeks, but then he will want, and both benefit from an hour or 2 or 3 or a day together or some time together, because that's all part of him growing up and becoming independent, etc. With the younger two, I think it would be different if they were 7 or 8, where a little bit of time every day is as important as deeper quality time. But that's just my perspective, obviously.
Sure.
These things shift and people are individual. But to answer your question, I think it has been tough on my daughter sometimes in particular. And it's not something I take lightly. So it's something I always keep under review. But I think that's the case for anybody listening who's just in a demanding job of any kind. You mentioned, Isabella, that I've always been very present. That's not true. When I was in my first stint as a senior manager at the Big Four, which I call my Big Four university, and I will say that I think the senior manager role is the hardest in the Big Four, because you're getting it from below, you're getting it from the clients at the side, you're having to manage upwards, and you're getting it from above. And I genuinely think it's harder than a director or a partner role.
Oh, really? That's
the senior manager role.
Yeah.
But I was, when I joined EY in 2009 as a senior manager in London, I was in the office till very late, day in, day out. And that was just part of the culture. It wasn't something like I didn't feel like I was being forced to. It was just the demands of the job. And it got to the stage my wife was sort of saying, well, you're up in the morning before I get up. So you're out of the house before I see you. You're back in the evening, almost after I'm put the kids to bed. It's not even a question of where are you, it's who are you. And that, as you no doubt guess, is not something that I'm allowed to forget in the 10, 15 years hence. So it comes up from time to time. But I would say that's actually, it doesn't matter about whether you're in this country or in that country, or it's more about what quality time do you spend together.
Yes, and obviously you do your best. We can only do our best in life, and we can make it work if we really try our best. I'm a strong believer in that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So going back to Middle East, what surprised you most about the region, professionally And personally?
Well, for me, the interesting, well, this is where we have a phrase in Polish, podróże kształcą,
Oh, yes.
which is travel educates. And I think that's very, very true. I think what it does in particular is it educates you on what the media think or say or represent about a topic, a country, and so on, and what the reality is day to day when you're there. Saudi Arabia is a particularly emotive topic for many people. And the interesting thing is, what was available to me to check before I went out. So I remember very clearly looking for films with Saudi Arabia in them, or even Saudi Arabian films.
Yeah.
And this was 4 years ago. I think one person put me onto a Tom Hanks film, which I can recommend if I can remember the title, which were offered a sort of humoristic view of an expat going and a consultant trying to win work from the government in Saudi. And then the other things seem to involve action movies and terrorist attacks and so on. And I started watching this, having already accepted the role, and then thinking, maybe this isn't the right thing. But you then go out, and this is the bit where podróże kształcą, travel educates, and you realize how many things are similar to patterns that you've seen before. So the Middle East generally is a very, very hospitable place for guests. And that goes back to religion and culture. We're not going to go into religion. You told me I'm not allowed. But I will say this much at this level. It reminded me of the culture of hospitality that we have in Poland, where we have the phrase gość w dom, Bóg w dom.
Right.
Guest in the house, God in the house. Or the alternative, gość dom, woda w zupę, which I'm not going to translate. See, people can use their Google for that. But the times when I've been invited to people's houses, or people have been very generous in terms of their hospitality to me in the Middle East, have been myriad. And the same struggle or tension between the traditional cultural religious way and path of the slightly older generation in some cases, and the more secular materialistic path is something that I've seen play out in the UK and Europe. And so those were commonalities, and it was interesting to see those similarities. And at the same time, the speed of change, the way that you can, even in the time I was there, people had told me, for example, if you'd been a couple of years earlier, just 3 or 4 years earlier, there would still have been separation of men and women in restaurants. There would still have been the religious police looking at what you were dressed, how you were dressed, and that's moved on. And women couldn't drive and so on.
Yeah.
And all of that has changed. But what you notice is the view from the UK and the media hasn't shifted as fast as the reality. So it's that perception gap.
That's right.
And that makes you, without focusing in just on Saudi, that same perception gap, I think, exists in a lot of places in our world, not just geographically, but on topics and so on. And that's one of the things that I think I've taken away as a big lesson, which is don't assume that you know just because you read a newspaper or you've read some books. Sometimes you have to go and experience it yourself to come to a proper view.
That's right. So, because obviously I am recruiting for different organizations in different jurisdictions, including Middle East, there is this perception from many candidates I deal with that Dubai is the place to be. It's kind of westernized, and everybody wants to be in Dubai, and you chose to be in a different place, which is more conservative, different. how would you compare those two locations for candidates who are thinking about relocating to Middle East?
I think it does come down to, in the same way as if someone wanted to live and work in Brighton, or someone wanted to live and work in London, or Aberdeen. It's horses for courses, Isabella. The standard of living in Dubai, in terms of convenience, in terms of quality of accommodation, the track record of schools is good and long-standing comparatively, because they got into a position where they were attracting a lot more expats sooner. That's just a fact.
That's right.
But at the same time, in the last couple of years in Riyadh, a whole series of schools has been built and set up, in addition to long-standing schools like the British school and the American schools in the various places. And they have consciously been developing the infrastructure to support or to attract expats. I would say that what I hear from people who have lived in Dubai for quite a while is that as time goes on, there are challenges and struggles with traffic and with the capacity, because it's a victim of its own success.
Yes.
It's almost too popular. And now they're starting to look at, I think, extending the metro and looking at ways of developing new centres where, rather than everyone travelling into the DIFC, that they'll be able to live and work closer to another centre. So that's now sort of underway. At the same time, Riyadh was slower, perhaps because it had, it would probably say a grander vision. But if you compare, I think I'm right in saying the UAE has, the Dubai Metro has like 2 lines. The Saudi Riyadh Metro, which is wonderful to travel on, I can say genuinely, has 6 lines from the get-go. And just that scale and size. But I think it's not for me to comment on which of those 2 cities I'd prefer to drive in. I think, but going back to your question, if people are considering the Middle East, I think there's no substitute for coming out and visiting, because if I'm interviewing somebody who wants to come out to the Middle East,
and they've never been, probably,
and if they've never been, and they're sitting there going, "Oh yeah, we'd love it," and it's brilliant. You sort of go, "Well, what level of research have you done on this?" And I always say, an interview is a 2-way thing. It should be something where the candidate is asking as many questions as well as possible of the interviewer, because ideally the outcome is not pass or fail. The outcome is, do you match, and do you realise how far you match and how far you don't? Because later on, if either side is disappointed, it's not a good outcome. So I would definitely recommend that people, if they're considering it, take some time out, maybe on a holiday, go and visit. It will come across very well in the interview if you've actually been to the region, and ask people who have been there and who are there, what's their experience been like, the real experience. And there are different options, of course. A lot of people who came out to Riyadh in particular in years gone by, and even now, might choose a compound where the prices are fairly high and getting higher, but you have a lot of amenities close by, a lot of other expat families. So again, if you're coming with your family, it might be important to you to be close to the school, to have your children having a peer group, etc. All of those things need to be looked at as well. And you can also take into account the fact that you have, within just the UAE, and there's other locations, lovely locations in the Middle East as well, but you have Abu Dhabi as well, which is a different vibe, a different context in terms of nightlife or lack of it. And that's neither good nor bad. It's what
different.
suits you and your interests, your family, and so on. But I think one of the key things I would say is obviously looking at affordability. A lot of people get attracted. You may remember the Mrs. Merton show some years back, where the lovely Debbie McGee, this is now going back in time for some people,
Right.
but Paul Daniels was a famous TV magician. He was a rather older gentleman, and he had a glamorous wife who was his assistant. And she sits on the couch, and Mrs. Merton, who is a wonderful comedienne, she just goes, "So what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels?" And the same way, sort of like for the Middle East, what first attracted you to the tax-free millionaire lifestyle? People are, this is again, is one of these things around podróże kształcą. There's actually something called the Dubai trap, which has been coined by expats who fall into a scenario where, because they're not paying tax legitimately on their income, and because so many things are available, they get used to having all their shopping delivered, having extra nannies, drivers for the kids, paying for this and this, and they end up realizing that they're not actually saving anything for their retirement. And as time goes on and as Dubai gets more popular, as an example, but this is similar in other parts of the region, there's also inflation and costs go up, and the situation then suddenly doesn't look quite as rosy as people had thought. So that's not to criticize the region, because everywhere you have the same problem of making sure you don't spend as much as you earn. But I think it's particularly something that I see people making a mistake on, because they assume that these are my costs, and then the tax saving is so big that it automatically justifies this and that. And I think you'd be well advised to plan for that carefully.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing about building a career in financial services tax, what would it be? Any advice to others?
Well, my general point would be taking a leaf out of a motivational speaker I saw a decade ago, Jim Lawless, who is, I think, the writer of Taming Tigers. And he talks about self-censorship, about these tigers in your mind. Oh, you couldn't be the sort of person that does this, or you couldn't do that, and so on. And in his case, I think he took up a challenge to become a jockey and also to break the free diving record, both of which things he did. And his point was that it's not about saying, oh, I can run faster than Usain Bolt, but it's about choosing a goal that means something to you, breaking that goal down, and then doing the little things every day, and not, before you even try, not stopping yourself just because the voice in your head says that's not for you. You're not the sort of person that can achieve that. And I think a lot of people have that voice in their head, if they're honest, and they may not realize quite how often it closes doors to them. So I suppose it goes back to my point earlier around, you can't know if going to the Middle East or going from in-house to Big Four or some other change is the right change, the right decision at the point in time. It's probably the case that there's multiple decisions that could be right. It depends on, is it an informed decision? Is it something you really want and prepared to sacrifice for, work for? And how are you going to commit to that decision once you make it? So if I go back to my younger self, it would probably be to say, be more aware of all the options in the market, including retraining or shifting sector or taking a completely different role. I think now, when I was a lad, I'll go back even further. When my father-in-law was working, he built the power station and then worked 45 years in the power station and would go on holiday with the teams from the power station, and retired and associated with the employees of the power station. And when I was changing jobs, even as often as every 5 or 6 years, he was shocked. Now, people changing jobs every 24 months is...
I wouldn't advise that personally.
No, but it's not unheard of.
Yeah.
And, the point is more around, I think, looking at why that happens. Is it because when you're younger, you want a bit more money and moving shows ambition and is rewarded with money? Is it because there's a genuine new challenge or stretch that you can get by moving? And the challenge I would put to people is actually, and I've said this before to people who, when they've been thinking of leaving a place, if you get on with your team and your leader, your manager, why not have the conversation? In many cases, it may be, I'm not feeling challenged, or I'm feeling bored and I want a different challenge. It may be possible to get that challenge somewhere else within the organization. And that's not to say that moving isn't always the right thing, but it's more around saying there could be more opportunity than you realize. And it goes back to, have you closed your thoughts off? So, in one case, when I was thinking of leaving somewhere, I had the discussion and someone said to me, but maybe you can take on the transfer pricing. And that was at one level tempting. But then I said, well, but if I do the transfer pricing, great. Who's going to do the indirect tax, the VAT? And they said, well, you do that as well. I said, would I have any more people? No. So I think, okay, well, it's not quite as tempting in that context. But at least I had the conversation. And, that then meant that, when I did then say, as you've tried, you've told me what's available. And for me, this is a better option now. And that's what I've decided. It wasn't taken as personally as if I just turned up and said, I'm leaving.
That's right.
And that's certainly in the Big Four context, what I tell people, junior team members who are thinking of leaving is, do try and be honest and tell people, look, I'm not happy, or I'm going to probably think about moving, leaving. Maybe to go in-house is a very common move. The reason for that is it's a small world, even if you move into the Middle East. And, the practicalities in the Big Four around, if someone goes, I need to, as a partner, need to argue for the resource to replace them. I need to think about, candidates for that. Maybe there are other people who have been interested in moving into that team, but I didn't know that this person was going to go, and I pushed them somewhere else, or I didn't take up that opportunity. And I think getting the most amount of notice possible of somebody potentially looking elsewhere is really appreciated by a lot of people in that situation, because if you're a grown up, you realize some people will want to leave or will need to move. That happens, but it's much easier to manage if you have a bit of grown up conversation.
One of the answers some candidates are giving when they're asked, why did you change jobs? What was the reason for that move? One of the answers sometimes I get, I have been headhunted. What does it mean? So someone was headhunted. It's not good enough reason to move. But my question is slightly different. What qualities are required to be a good headhunter, in your opinion?
It comes back to, more generally, the ability to listen, to take an interest, to not make assumptions. It helps if the person understands your job or the role. I suppose my answer might be different depending on whether I'm talking about a headhunter dealing with me for a role or a headhunter bringing me candidates. But the principles are the same. You want somebody who you can explain things to, who listens, who doesn't just try and push what they were going to push anyway in terms of candidates who are not suitable for the role. That's not to say that a good headhunter couldn't disagree correctly with what I or someone else might think we need, or the candidate we think we should on paper take in. But yeah, it's there's not a prescription in my mind, Isabella, around exactly the perfect headhunter.
So tax in general is often described as dry. And you clearly don't find it dry because you're in this profession for many years. So what really still excites you about being in a tax profession?
Well, I used to say in my speaker notes, at university, I did a master's in Gulag literature, so the Soviet labor camps. And I used to say that from those tales of inhuman suffering and torture, it was a natural progression to tax. I think the answer comes more from tax, as like any subject can be dry. It's not the subject in itself, it's the context. So working with teams. So whether you're in-house or you're in and I've had the privilege of being both in-house at different places in the Big Four, you see different skills, but also different interpersonal relationships that arise. And I used to. I remember when I was at BNY Mellon in particular, when I was thinking about what I really liked about the place, it was the people in my team, the relationships, the ability to be myself and come to work. I mean, it's a cliche now, said a lot, but it's true, as many cliches are. Being able to bring your whole self to work makes a big difference. In terms of your particular question around why is tax still exciting, love it or loathe it, it's here to stay. Death or taxes. And it's a topic that a lot of people censor themselves. I couldn't get involved in tax. And within the taxes, the VAT is the Cinderella of the taxes. That's not to say that all of my direct tax colleagues are the ugly sisters, but we're still waiting to be invited to the ball. But with the VAT in particular, you are getting into understanding the business because and this is a blatant generalization by an indirect tax specialist for which I will not be forgiven. But direct tax starts with the accounts, and then there's adjustments to the accounts based on rules. And there's some interesting case law and some arguments back and forth and some complex legislation to get your head round and argue about the meanings and the interactions of legislation from different places. All wonderful. But you never quite get down most times to something like you get in VAT, where whether a biscuit dries or not may make a difference, or whether the chocolate or whether it was something was heated for the purpose of eating it or for the purpose of baking it. Now, sort of those are the sort of esoteric things people associate with VAT. But you also have, organizing process and systems, understanding people, and how people will act in certain ways, which then impacts whether they will give you the right information or not for your tax return or whatever it might be. There's all sorts of interesting challenges in tax. I believe, as in other fields, it's the context. It's the people you're doing it with. It's the skills you're learning as you're going through that profession. I think for me, after 20 years of doing tax in the UK, I needed the challenge of coming to a different location to shock myself into learning a different regime and a different approach as well, and to compare and contrast. But for many, it's such a deep and broad topic that if you keep your eyes open to opportunities to branch out, you will keep finding things that will interest you. And those could be things in terms of the topics, the type of taxes you deal with, the focus. So some people I know have gone from poacher to gamekeeper, from taxpayer to tax authority. They found that a fascinating contrast as well. And because of the deeper importance of tax for our society, I'm not going to get into politics because I'm not allowed, but there is that piece around is there something valuable at the end of this? And apologies because I've been rambling on, but that's what you told me it needs to be. When you get to a certain age, you might look back and say, what was it all for? The biblical quote, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And I think, I've certainly had one counsellee who didn't want to work in the financial sector because they didn't feel that it was socially useful to help banks and asset managers and others pay what I would say is the right amount of tax, but sort of mitigate their tax impacts and that sort of thing. I respect that. Someone that need to find purpose in what you do, and eventually they moved into very successfully into sustainability, but still within the financial sector. So being able to leverage their knowledge, but then link that to their own personal sense of purpose, and I think that is important for people to do. Now, whether it's you're working because you want to raise a family or support your elderly dependents or just to put a roof over your head, all of those have sense and purpose and meaning. But I would also encourage listeners and viewers to think sooner about what their own personal sense of purpose is and how far their career and their work plays a part in that. Because I do find more and more as I talk to people, probably in their early 40s, that they start questioning it at that point. And so, doubling back on the question you asked before, what would I say to my earlier self? I think that would be one thing that I would say is work out what your personal sense of purpose is in the job you do, and then make sure that you're comfortable with that. And if there's something that gives you more meaning and more purpose, go for it.
Just summarizing that, if a young professional is actually listening this,
God help them after this minute.
I know, and is actually thinking whether should enter this tax profession right now, what would be just the final advice you would give them? Why would should they go for a tax profession?
Well, I would say make an informed decision. So, you won't hear anything original from me on this. Find out from people who are in the profession. But, I mean, I always say about feedback and other people's views, it's information. It's their truth. It's not the truth. And, if you decide to travel from here in Brighton to London, you can get in a car and you could probably just about make it without just directionally working it out. But it'll take you a while and you probably get lost a couple of times along the way. If you take Google Maps and the feedback from Google Maps, you will get there a lot quicker. However, if Google Maps suddenly tells you to drive down a one-way street or into the sea, you will use your own common sense ultimately to make the decision, hopefully. It's the same with feedback and asking others. It can help accelerate your path and your decision making and making better decisions. But ultimately, it needs to be you making that decision. And sometimes in my career path, I've heard, oh, no, you couldn't manage to do that, or that's not possible. And that's sort of spurred me on to do it rather than not to do it, rightly or wrongly. So I would say, it goes back to that, Isabella, which is make an informed decision, make your own decision, but take into account, get as much information, feedback as you can. I always say to people, talk to the people who know you best, who are absolutely on your side, and who will tell you the truth, which in my case would be my wife. No unvarnished truth there, but talk everything through with them, because the danger is that people will be too nice to tell you what they genuinely perceive.
Yes.
Whereas my wife doesn't have that problem, and I suspect the spouses and loved ones and special friends of the listeners will also not have that problem. And sometimes you need to hear that unvarnished perception. You may still not agree with it, but it's valuable.
What a great answer, great advice. Thank you so much for that. And now, finally, shall we go into this spoiler, which I've mentioned, towards the Queen and singing? Can you tell us more about this?
I can take Her Majesty's name in vain. I'm sure it wasn't a highlight of her life, but it was one of the things that I enjoyed most in my time at KPMG and my second tour of duty was I became the sponsoring partner of the KPMG Arts Society, and we had a show choir, which was nicknamed, not by me, I wish I had, because it would have been added to my list of dad puns that I'd be punished for by my younger two children, but it was called KPM Glee. And, I hadn't sung in a choir since school, but I always up for a sing song, and so that being part of that group and singing was fun, but it became even more important, that and other things, when we were struck by COVID, because as you'll remember, though now I think we're all trying to forget as quickly as possible, the psychological toll that COVID took on a lot of people was very significant. Yes, someone's reminiscing there in the background as we speak. And the need to have some sort of release mechanism, psychological safe space, but equally some things where you could connect with others was really, really important. And so what we did was we expanded from just the show choir, because not everyone's into show choir, and we had someone who I met this morning actually, who ran sessions on how to set cryptic crosswords. So if you've ever struggled with cryptic crossword clues and how they're set and what they mean, and we had a bunch of people happy with that. We rolled up a couple of book clubs. We had, and I can't remember what exactly it was called, but it was sort of therapeutic drawing sessions that were very well received. And the importance that took on for the different people organising that was heartening, frankly. And then at the same, I think during that period, KPMG had some big anniversary in terms of its institution, and they were to have, because someone at KPMG was I'm going to get the name wrong, I think the royal purser or the treasurer to the privy purse. Maybe it was the treasurer to the privy purse. So looked after the Queen's money effectively. And so there was what would have been in person, but during COVID became a webcast. So we had the KPMG members, each in our own place, with the Christmas jumpers, singing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" to Her Majesty. I gather she probably prefers ABBA, but I wasn't aware of any ABBA Christmas carols. And so, I can genuinely say that I have sung for Her Majesty the Queen. But what I would say is that the broader part of that it goes back to what I was saying before, Isabella, bringing your whole self to work, being able to enjoy and bring something that's not necessarily anything to do with the day-to-day work, and enjoy it together with your colleagues, and to feel that you're in a place where, if that's not your thing, there's some other things, and it's not just a place where you have to flit in, do your work, flit out again. I would say, like, when you had, I saw this quite a lot, and so this would be another piece of advice that I would give to your massive listening public, and the viewers at home, which is take an interest in people. If you're in one of these offices where you've hot desking and you sit down next to somebody, ask their name, ask them who they are. I saw so many times at KPMG before COVID, I would see someone in my team and there'd be someone sat next to them who I didn't recognize for a couple of days. And I would then say, "Oh, who was that? I didn't know."
Be present. Yes,
well, be present, but I think it's take an interest. And don't, because otherwise the risk is that your office becomes like a serviced office. You just come in, do your work, you go out again. And I remember when we were coming back from COVID, one of the points was, we're not going to have as much time in the office every day. And that's going to be a challenge for some of the junior team members. Because, where are they going to learn from? There's things that you learn from a book, but there's things that you learn, and there's things you can learn in training courses and structured training, but there's also a sort of learning by osmosis. And that's when we realized, well, actually, in the City Big Four practice at the time, like, how much time is a partner going to spend in the office between the hours of 9 and 5 anyway? Because they'll be out at meetings and stuff, and it's actually, they come back at the end of the day, by which stage maybe some of the juniors might want to be leaving the office. So, actually it's not just a one-way thing around, the junior needs to be in the office however many hours to show that they're present and they're going to learn. It's also got to be, well, are we making the right environment for the teams to spend time together?
That's right. Yes. Peter, thank you very much for this. So going back very quickly, just before we completely wrap up, if we could just ask you a question, if I could ask you a question about singing again. So you sang for the Queen, Christmas Carol. If you were asked to participate, being part of the choir for our King, Charles, what song would you choose for him?
Well, I'd need to understand what he likes, really.
You have to do your research.
Do my research, yes, make an informed decision, ask people in the know.
Yes.
It would have to be something with not too many high notes, because I don't think I could make those. And probably something that had some humoristic angle to it.
It's been a real pleasure having you here on my podcast. Thank you very much, Peter Delewski, for your presence.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.